Ritika, unmute.
You are on mute.
Oh, sorry. Namaste and good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of South Asian Study Centers at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav Evam Niti Anusandhan Sansthan, Nai Delhi, I, Ritika Gupta, Assistant Director at IMPRI, welcome you to IMPRI #Web Policy Talk. Today, this special talk, as part of the series, The State of Economic Development in South Asia, #EconDev discussion, will talk about regional trade and developmental challenges in South Asia. I would like to welcome our moderator for today, Professor Utpal Kumar Dey, who is professor at Northeastern Hill University at Shri. Sir, over to you. Professor Dey, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ritika. So, at the outset, I would like to thank all of you for joining, and good afternoon, you to all, to you all here. So, as all of you know that we are having during last few months a series of discussions on the issues related to the rural development, climate change issues, and the government policies towards industries, agriculture, rural development, trade, etc. And that got more relevance under this pandemic situations, for which the whole economy was stuck, not only in India, across the world, and South Asian region was also highly affected, despite the incidences varied across the countries. So under this IMPRI's invited lecture series, along with the CDES and the Counter Views joint effort here on the state of economic development in South Asia of the Eco Development Discussion Series. Today we will have an address on the issue regional trade and the development challenge in South Asia. So, as you know, during this pandemic specifically, not only that agriculture, environment, trade, industrial production, employment, all these are affected, but the regional trade was also affected, which is highly related with the connectivity or the sub-regional cooperation or the connections. So in this connection, some discussions are earlier held, and Dr. Prabir, who is also present today as a panelist today, so he delivered a lecture on the South Asian interconnectivity across the countries and how trade is to revive. So during this pandemic, what we had observed at some point of time is that both exports and imports were highly or severely affected. Rather, imports were reduced much more than the exports at some point of time, and that's why the foreign exchange reserve of the country slightly increased. And so some of the people started telling that in that terms of trade or the overall trade balance gone in favor of India, but whether that was really beneficial for the country's welfare or the progress, there was a question, because many of these imports that were not held during that period of time was mostly the capital goods, and that is needed for the production activities. Since production activities are not taking place, and because of the lockdown and other things, and that's why that imports were also reduced significantly. Similarly, with that value of the dollar, etc., many such things which are well highly connected with our trade prospects, we can see. So regional trade, where India is looking forward, specifically after its integration with the ASEAN and become a full-fledged dialogue member in 2002, and thereafter, how it has grown and whether India could capitalize on this integration process. That is also not so prospective that we have seen since our last 2 decades of data. Anyway, so today we are very glad to have with us Professor Amita Batra, the Professor of Economics and currently the Chairperson of Center for South Asian Studies, So it is befitting with our objective of the discussion. And she is under the School of International Studies of Jawaharlal Nehru University. So Professor Batra was also a senior visiting fellow at the Department of Political Economy and Faculty of Arts and Social Science of the University of Sydney during 2018. And she was the first holder in January to May 2013 of the ICCR Professional Chair in Contemporary Indian Studies at the Center for South Asian Studies and Edinburgh India Institute, University of Edinburgh. She was also been the visiting professor at the IIM Ahmedabad. Professor Batra is a member of Economic Affairs Council in 2021 year of the Confederation of Indian Industry, CII. She is one of the editorial committee member of the two prospective journals, Asian Perspective of the Johns Hopkins University and Journal of the East Asian Economic Integration, published from SASC. She published numerous articles on the same theme in international and national journals and also in edited volumes, and also an honorary member of the advisory board of Center for Advanced Trade Research of the Trade Promotion Council of India. Professor Batra is also an occasional columnist in Business Standard, a leading financial daily in India, all of you know. Her two prominent book publications I would like to mention here, apart from other discourses: the Regional Economic Integration in South Asia, Trapped in Conflict, that was published from Routledge, London in 2013. And most recently, she published a monograph on the Rebel Comparative Advantage and Gravity Model Analysis of the Trade Partners, Patterns and Regional Economic Integration, Empirical Evidence in the Indian Context, that came in 2016 from Academic Foundation, New Delhi, and also the Indian Econometric Society. So highly her works is befitting with the theme that has been chosen today. Though a little bit of this gravity model, we got the idea from Prabir's lecture. We look forward towards her to listen for some more knowledge on these issues related to the South Asian integration, trade prospects, especially under this post-pandemic situation, so how to progress and get the development, contribute towards India's development. Now, today's session will be chaired by Shri N. Ramesh. I think Sir Ramesh is here, Deputy Managing Director of the EXIM Bank. I welcome you. And as a discussion today, we are having with us Dr. Ganesha Wignaraja, Senior Fellow of the Institute of South Asian Studies, National University of Singapore, and Overseas Development Institute, London. He's associated with that. Professor Prabir is with us from Research and Information System, New Delhi, RIS. Dr. Raghu Bista is a faculty of Department of Economics. I welcome you. Are you here, Dr. Bista of Tribhuvan University? And also Professor Riazul Karim Boksi from Rajshahi University, Professor of Economics, Bangladesh. So I welcome you all, and including the panelists and the participants. Now it is over to the chair to initiate the process and request Madam Professor Batra to deliver her speech. Sir Ramesh.
Thank you, Professor De. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my honor and privilege to be part of this web policy talk series organized by South Asian Studies of the IMPRI. I thank the organizers for inviting me to chair this session by Professor Amita Batra, Chairperson and Professor, Center for South Asian Studies, School of International Studies, JNU, New Delhi. Welcome to you, Professor Batra. Initial thoughts on this particular session. We all know that the pandemic has impacted all the countries, more so the developing economies. And the South Asian region is not an outlier for this. For the first time in past few decades, we are witnessing a negative growth uh, on an average of minus 7% in 2020. But it is expected to bounce back strongly in 2021. I think the latest IMF World Economic Outlook growth projections strongly endorse this factor. So this optimism is strongly rooted in the resilience on South Asian economy. The South Asian countries contributed largely to the global trade, where we had around $0.7 billion, sorry, 714 billion dollars in 2010, which increased to nearly 1 trillion in 2019. But the percentage increase is not commensurate with this particular. Uh, uh, the same trend is not there across all other trade partners. More so, the intra-regional trade is very small at only 6%. So there is naturally there is a lot of potential for growth when we have this other blocks, say ASEAN or say NAFTA or the role model EU, where the intra-regional trade is at a much higher level. I hope this particular talk is going to throw more light on that and give us a policy direction on how to move forward. Without taking much time, I request Professor Amita Batra to enlighten us with her thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Am I audible to everybody? Can you all hear me, please?
Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for that very kind introduction, Professor Day. Thank you also to IMPRI for inviting me today for this talk. And thank you, Chair, again, for those introductory remarks on both the state of affairs as far as India is concerned, South Asia is concerned, and what's happening as far as the global economic prospects are concerned. I have chosen to speak today on regional trade and developmental challenges in South Asia. I think two issues which are not generally considered together. You know, I mean, while we do talk about trade in South Asia, we do talk about trade in India. It is rarely that we consider trade to be a means to overcome or even be able to meet the kind of challenges that we face in South Asia. I am today going to present an overview of many, different kind of issues that I try and put together under these two heads. They are not, I mean, at some stage you may feel they are disparate ideas, but I'd like to put them forward in order to kind of develop a canvas on how we can, or what is it that we should be thinking about when we are talking about regional trade, or when we are talking about trade at all as a means to development and developmental challenges, in particular in South Asia. As regards South Asia's developmental challenges, there is no doubt about the fact that South Asia houses a large proportion of the global poor. As far as South Asia is concerned, I think we are the lowest, or we have the largest number, both in terms of the hunger index as well as the undernourished number of people in the world. Food security, I think, has been a major challenge for this region. But other than this food security, what I want to bring forward today, I think even underlying food security, underlying the aspect of hunger or undernourishment, is one big aspect that this region particularly needs to confront and deal with, which is its demography, And I feel that the root of developmental challenges, or development as such, that is to take the idea of development forward in the region, this is one aspect that one has to be able to deal with in a very conscious manner, in a way that we can actually reap the dividend of the demographic profile of the region for the betterment of the region. How do I link it with trade? I'll come to in a moment. But in the first place, I do want to say, that as far as demography is concerned, We are all familiar with the kind of demographic dividend that we all talk about in the context of South Asia. Given that we have amongst the largest proportion of total population in the age group of 15 to 64, that is really the working age group, the core of this working age group or demographic profile, though, you see, has been in terms of our inability to really match the skills of the working age group with the kind of demand that we generate as far as skills are concerned, So while we have a certain advantage as far as the demographic profile is concerned, the skill profile of the same demography does not give us or does not allow us to reap the dividend that this demographic profile would otherwise have the potential for, Much of this has to do with education. A lot has to do with healthcare. Again, major challenges as far as this region is concerned, major challenges in terms of not only what we face today, what has been aggravated by climate change, vulnerabilities on account of that, but also each of these challenges, I feel, you see, whether we talk about food security or whether we talk about the demography, has been aggravated by the pandemic. And the pandemic in particular here, you see, because as far as this demography is concerned, the mismatch between the skills, you see, in terms of demand and supply has also led to two things. One is unemployment on a large scale. The other is the informality of those who are employed. That is a large proportion of the total population being actually employed in the informal sector, And both of these having reinforced each other by the pandemic. The fact that many have been rendered unemployed, many have been rendered unemployed on account of the closures, the lockdowns, the solutions, the inevitable solutions that we sought in the pandemic. Also because of the kind of closure, also because the global economies have also been able to meet or kind of combat the challenge of the pandemic only through the lockdowns. All economies have been closed. Many of these services have been closed, travel, tourism, major industries of the world, you see, that have employed many people have been closed, And so the impact on South Asia has been significant. We've seen all of this result in large-scale unemployment, large-scale people who were employed earlier in the informal sector having been rendered unemployed, The fact that unemployment is a consequence, to a certain extent, I link it up with demography, because I feel that as far as demography is concerned, what it allows us to do actually is defeated by the manner in which we have progressed so far and progressed in particular as far as trade is concerned. I bring in the angle of trade here to link it up, and I'll be very happy to have comments from the others from the region because we have such an expert panel here today. From around the region. But in the first place, let me just say, you see, introduce trade. We're all familiar with, we're all economists. We've all kind of studied this, that trade as an engine of growth, as liberal philosophy is as old as, economics, if we may say so, Trade leads to prosperity, particularly if it's based on comparative advantage. If individual countries are allowed to trade or they do trade on the basis of comparative advantage, it leads to efficient allocation of resources, and efficient allocation of resources leads to greater growth and prosperity for all, including expansion of industries, trade creation, consequent employment, There is also more recently been a lot of debate as far as trade is concerned on the adverse impact of trade in terms of the kind of inequalities that it has led to, in terms of certain industries growing faster than the others, certain industries having allowed for greater prosperity rather than others, certain sections of the population having been rendered lesser well off, in comparison to other. Here is where we have the role of state, that is, the state must be able to enter, no matter how much we're talking about in terms of promoting liberal philosophy, in terms of a liberal system, more and more trade, market-oriented economies, one cannot deny the role of state. And the role of state here is most obviously seen in terms of taking care of those who are rendered unemployed or who are rendered out of the industries that take a beating when any country opens up to trade. And at the same time, reskilling these people in order to make them capable of getting employment in the industries that are expanding. That is, while some industries may be outcompeted on account of trade, people in those industries would be rendered unemployed. There would be opportunities from expanding industries, but that shift from those that are being outcompeted to those that are expanding is the responsibility. The shifting of labor from these two or between these two is the responsibility of the state, which the state must own up to. And in fact, this has been done. I will come back repeatedly to what has also been mentioned by the chair, the East Asian economies, Southeast Asian economies. Many of the East Asian economies, Japan, for example, Korea, for example, have actually developed during this time boards as well as skilling boards, reskilling boards, and reskilling institutions to be able to provide skills to those who've been rendered unemployed on account of opening up to trade, So the possibilities of providing for those who are rendered unemployed lies with the state. And as we open up more and more to the market, I think the role of state increases in terms of taking care of those who cannot participate directly in the market, but making them capable at the same time in the longer run, As far as trade is concerned, I think I now take it from the theoretical viewpoint to what has really been happening around the world in the last 2.5 decades. How is it that we've seen trade move in these 2.5 decades is really that trade flows have increased by multiple times, I mean, what they were in the early 2000s to where they were in 2008-9, just before the global financial crisis and after, I think there was an unprecedented increase in trade in relation to GDP growth. While output was increasing, you had trade increasing by many times more than the output. The elasticity of trade to income was almost 2 in the immediate years preceding the global financial crisis. And we did see a quick recovery in 2009-10, 2012 onwards, the rate of growth of trade has been slower. We did see a negative rate of growth in 2015, but recovery also in 2017 and 2018. So as far as global growth has been, global trade growth is concerned, particularly in the first decade of this century, towards the last 5 years, 1995 to 2007-8, have been almost like the peak period of global trade. When we saw rate of growth of trade rising really fast, And even today, when in the last few years, we've seen trade tensions, the US-China trade war, etc., take over global trade flows, rate of growth of trade has fallen. There have been other reasons, not necessarily that trade is not responsive to income, but it may be differentially responsive, with services taking over a larger proportion of overall manufacturing, which may not be reflected truly in trade statistics. I'll come to that later. But what I want to say here is that this rising trade that has been observed globally in 1995 to 2007-8, and even after till about 2012, was trade that was led by what we call as trade in the intermediates, that is trade in the intermediate products, because there was a fragmentation of production around the world, of manufacturing around the world, So this trade was really led by global value chains, and the dynamism that was involved in these global value chains and certain sectors within these, within the larger core of manufacturing that were really progressing or that were really dynamic in terms of undergoing a segmentation of their production processes. This was happening very, very vigorously. I think we saw the peak of global value chains emerging in 2002 to 2011 in the first decade of this century. And interestingly enough, the most the most rapid involvement or the largest involvement in this period of growth of global trade was by and of developing countries. The maximum share in the increase in global trade was of developing countries, even though the largest share at any point of time was that of developed economies. So it's really the developing economies and trade between developing economies, what we've come to call as South-South trade, that was contributing to the maximum to this rate of growth increasing rate of growth of trade in this period, you see. So it's been basically trade in intermediates, trade as far as led by production fragmentation, global value chains leading to this kind of rapid growth of trade and a rapid participation of developing countries. That has really been at the core of trade growth that we have seen. You see, when trade has contributed to global growth, global prosperity, and global reduction in poverty around the world, particularly in our neighboring region, you see, which is Southeast Asia and East Asia. Because within this developing world that was predominant in this global value chain trade, the maximum share or the rising share was that of East Asia. Of course, China came to dominate at some point, you see, in the early 2000s, post its accession to the WTO. But prior to that, we had, of course, this region developing its own production network in what we, again, in economics, all are familiar with as the flying geese trading model. Started with Japan, its foreign direct investment in Southeast Asian economies, looking for low-wage economies as far as segmentation of production processes is concerned. So led by Japan, followed by China as the central hub of East Asia, East Asian economies really came to lead the process of global value chains as they emerged as the predominant lead factor of global trade in the 2000s, as we've experienced very high rates of growth in this period. One must also realize that the East Asia has been very, very specific as far as the segmentation process is concerned, where it is network production led by the market that was really clearly predominantly seen in East Asia, unlike even in North America or in case of EU. Again, I'll come back to this if we require to later, during the comment session. As I said, so certain set of developing countries that were predominant in this, but there have also been certain sectors that are predominant, that have been predominant in this global value chain formation. And these predominant sectors, you see, that have been seen to dominate as far as, the process of global value chains is concerned, has been in the communications and electrical equipment, automotives, textiles. In all these sectors, again, we've seen some of the developing countries participate at a much faster rate than other developing countries. And it's really been dominated by China in terms of its export markets. It's really been dominated by East Asia. In case of East Asia, it's really been the intra-regional trade within, which has almost been 35 to 40% for them. That has been the dominant characteristic of East Asia's participation in global value chains in these sectors. We've also seen some South Asian countries, particularly in the apparel sector, there is Bangladesh. There's also been Sri Lanka to a certain extent, you see, that has had its own niche participation as far as textiles value chain is concerned. But I have to emphasize, or I'll probably come to this again, is what I want to emphasize here is that although we do see a certain amount of participation in these dynamic sectors from India, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka, we do not really see a huge amount of participation by these economies in what has come to be the lead factor in trade across the world, which is global value chains. And I say this in particular, you see, because if, I had a chance to kind of look at the database that's available internationally on the value addition, that is the means as to calculate the participation of individual countries in global value chains. And surprisingly so, if you look at it, India is the only country from South Asia that finds a mention in that database. None of the other South Asian countries are even mentioned in terms of their participation as far as global value chains are concerned. I say this because, as I said, global value chains, it's important to understand, have been the lead factor in promoting trade. So to what extent has South Asia participated in this lead determining factor of global trade? It has been insignificant participation in terms of value chain trade, you see. So it's an interesting, insight that I would like to highlight here, and have the comments of others in terms of how South Asia has performed. In fact, as a region, South Asia does not find a mention in this database, again, because it's not been significant enough in terms of its participation as far as international value chain trade is concerned and global value chains are concerned. Other than that, the other factor that one is the value chain, the dominant country set, the dominant sectors as far as value chains are concerned, the participation of East Asia, the relative participation as far as South Asia is concerned in this, determining factor as far as global trade is concerned. The other factor that I want to highlight here is, that as far as trade globally is concerned, it's really made a shift from the focus that prevailed in the 1990s till about 1994, 5 after, that we had on multilateralism and reduction in tariffs as a means to increasing trade globally. Multilateralism, of course, is the first best option that all countries would have, if we are to trade more and more. This is what we've always believed in. And in fact, South Asia and most of the South Asian economies, in fact, all of the South Asian economies as a region, has placed greater faith and trust in multilateralism rather than what has come to be now the major mode of trade around the world, which is really in terms of trade agreements, that is preferential trade agreements, PTAs, that have now come to be translated into the bilateral agreements, as well as what we now see in the fore, that is mega regional trade agreements. So as far as multilateralism is concerned, that's, we've seen the late 1990s, the 2000s, all of 2000s, in fact, starting with the 2001, I think, when we have the starting of the Doha Development Agenda, to now, when we haven't seen any concrete agreement come out of the multilateral system. In fact, ever since the WTO has come into being, we haven't really seen any round to be completed. The last was Uruguay round, when you had a completion, in a way, of many developing countries entering into the process of their agreements as far as textiles was concerned, agriculture was concerned, intellectual property, even as far as tariffs to a very large extent, reduction and binding their rates were concerned. So much of the process, we would say, in terms of multilateralism, hasn't moved forward as far as global trade is concerned. What has really moved forward in these last 2 decades has been that liberalization, that is, most of the liberalization has been outside the multilateral system, either undertaken unilaterally or has been undertaken at the regional level. I think it's very important to understand, that trade and trade liberalization in the last 2 decades, 2000 to 2017, has happened most rapidly at the regional level, and so much so that we say that as of 2017, about half of world trade was occurring under some or the other form of a preferential trading arrangement, And between 2000 and 2017, we've seen the cumulative number of regional trading arrangements in force grow from 79 to 287. Look at the increase that we've seen in that. East Asia, again, neighboring region, the most obvious example that we see, one of the 3 poles of these global value chains that we see, the other 2 being North America and Europe, has 83 RTAs in force. This is of 2017 as of, second only to EU, which had 97, This is from the WTO database, And we've seen post this, most recently, we've seen in the region the development of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. We've also seen the development of, most recently, the development of the Comprehensive Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership that's emerging as the other mega regional as far as this region is concerned, So we've seen this region get into many forms of preferential trading agreements. We've seen this region get into many forms of, bilateral as well as mega regional trading agreements, as well as the global value chains, each facilitating the other, because as long as the WTO or the multilateral system has not been working, the bilaterals, and now more so the mega regionals, have become the means to take forward this fragmentation of production, with like-minded countries coming together, led by their large corporations, in formulating rules, largely in terms of regulatory policies to facilitate trade across countries. Again, I had a chance to look at the database just before I started this talk. As far as the FTA and the PTA database for South Asian countries is concerned, And it doesn't come as a surprise if you look at these countries, other than India, which has a couple of free trade agreements, I mean, a few trade agreements, let me say that, which most of them being under revision now. India has not entered into the RCEP. But beyond India, you see, which has a few of these trade agreements, none of the other countries really have any, in the sense, more than 2 or 3 trade agreements. Sri Lanka is the other one, which has, I think, 2 or 3. But the other countries, you see, other than what they have as their historical treaties with India, have not entered into any major trade agreements. Many alliances are seen, as far as some of the countries in the region are concerned, with like, I would say in terms of orientation, countries. You would see Pakistan, China, FTA as one example. There are certain others being negotiated. You see several that have been launched, that are under negotiation, that are under consultation, where studies are being undertaken. But major FTAs, PTAs with countries, you see, that are major components or parts of this large value chain business that's happened around the world in terms of leading trade, has not really happened as far as South Asia is concerned, where India has participated in trade agreements, many on the eastern side, in fact, most with developing countries, ASEAN. We have some with, Japan. We have one with Korea. We've been negotiating one with Australia, New Zealand, not as yet. RCEP, we haven't participated. But despite that, India's participation in global value chains remains minimal, and certainly minimum as far as backward value chain integration is concerned, which is more significant, which is what the East Asian countries have done, which is what East Asian countries becoming predominantly involved in electronics value chain has allowed them to do. And why are backward integration in value chains important? Well, because it allows them, or backward value chains are really labor intensive. And that is where the entire employment perspective would come in if India were to, or if South Asia was to integrate with the world in terms of these value chains. Of course, this would require a large amount of enhancement in manufacturing capabilities and capacity for this regional, for the region as a whole. It would also require us to be more open in terms of our own trade liberalization efforts. Recent past, of course, have not seen this in a very, very apparent fashion. There has been more a tendency to increase protectionist duties in certain sectors, particularly in automotives and textiles, as far as India is concerned, which has been to the detriment of entering into value chains, you see. Again, entering into the RCEP would have been one means to gain entry into, value chains for India. Hasn't done so. Why India, I talk about, I'll come to in a minute, but now I move on to what we have as South Asia, in the sense, looking at the region, linking it up with what I've been talking about, As I said, South Asia and global trade, yes, we've increased our participation, but as a share of global trade, we are still very insignificant in terms of global value chains. As I said already, very insignificant in terms of our ratios. We're hardly there, not worth inclusion in the overall database. It's minimum, except for India. No other country in South Asia finds itself in the WTO OECD database as far as value-added trade in the world is concerned. What is the option? Do we have enough as far as within region trade is concerned? If we look at Southeast Asia and East Asia, it's really been intra-regional trade that has allowed them to be a participant in the global value-added trade as well. Has South Asia followed that? Not really. South Asia's intra-regional trade, I mean, I don't need to say this, we say this constantly, has been constant now for a very long time. And this has been so despite the fact that, again, there have been several studies. I think I did a study about, that's been about a decade and a half ago, where I said, this is the potential. Since then, there have been many other studies using gravity model that have stated the kind of potential that exists for South Asia, given its natural affinity to become a regional trade bloc, you see. Sadly, we haven't, for many reasons that are both economic as well as non-economic, but also because we've not allowed our one South Asian free trade agreement to really take the form that would be beneficial in the region, in terms of allowing or identifying complementarities that would take the region forward, Increasingly, what one has seen is that in the region, we've seen China become a major trading partner for many of the smaller economies, whether that be in terms of Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, where Nepal, India and China alternating with each other in terms of primary trading partner, major trading partner, the largest trading partner, My question, of course, which I hope some of the other panelists will address is, does the kind of linkages that are happening with China as far as these economies are concerned, allow them in any way to become a part of the larger regional or global value chains that China itself is leading? Is trade really happening in the comparative advantage sectors that would bring them into the more dynamic sections, or into really put them into a dynamic route to development and trade? Not really. I think what really matters for these economies in South Asia, is to start looking at intra-regional trade within the region as a means to growth and development, And now take the opportunity, particularly given, as I said, what I started with, pandemic having aggravated the developmental challenges, how we've seen global trade across the world, move in a manner where it has led to both growth as well as to development across the world, particularly to countries that have participated to the maximum in these global value chains, segmentation, backward integration, employment intensive integration. If you're able to do that within the region, I think that is where the solutions for the region lie, There have been many, in the sense we've had discussions in the past where in manufacturing, textiles is often mentioned. As I said, we've got some rudimentary textiles value chains happening both in Bangladesh as well as Sri Lanka. There's also a triangular supply chain that we see now between Bangladesh, India, and Sri Lanka as far as textiles is concerned. I call them rudimentary because you're still linked to a very large extent in terms of not exploiting comparative advantage of the region in the manner that it should, A lot of, raw material that can be imported from within is actually imported from countries around. Not necessarily at the cheapest, not necessarily in terms of lowest costs, even as far as transportation costs are concerned. So there is an incurring of higher trade costs, higher transaction costs, relative to what they could have been if greater trade in those commodities was done within the region. I understand that there are barriers in terms of both non-tariff barriers as well as political situations and bilateral relations. But I think it's important that we start to identify very clearly how we can concretize value chains within the region, not only in these traditional sectors, but I would also want to emphasize that the pandemic brings forth to us newer opportunities of within the region trade. And I'd like to highlight two here. One is in terms of agriculture, which I feel we've been talking about for a long time, but that is where the core of this region really lies, Almost all countries in the region have maximum population still continuing to be dependent on the agricultural sector. Why is it that we do not? Instead of harping about not having enough complementarities or manufacturing capabilities, we have to sit down and identify a greater number of complementarities in the agricultural sector. And having some, the panelists being lead advisors as far as research in their own countries is concerned, I think this is the best opportunity that we have to say that future research, or as much research as possible, should be undertaken in an area where the largest sections of the population, the poorest sections of the population really depend on, which is agriculture. And if agro-processing could be one big industry that we could take forward in the region, I think we can develop an employment-intensive, labor-intensive value chain. We have some forms of this already, but I think it can be increased given the kind of diversity of agricultural regions that we have in the region. I think we can identify many more complementarities. The second that I want to identify here is in terms of tourism, strange as it may sound, talking about tourism in the times of pandemic, but I think it's very significant given that tourism around the world is going to take some time to pick up, And some of the countries in South Asia have tourism as a major component of their economy. Maldives, Sri Lanka. Plus, I also feel that this is a region that has a lot of potential for tourism within. And if we can, you see, given the kind of vaccine diplomacy that's happened, I think we are very lucky to have that in terms of, the trade export of vaccine that's happening from India to these countries. Given that India has the largest manufacturer of vaccine in the country, you see, if that can be done and if bio bubbles can be developed within the region, can we think about a tourism value chain within South Asia that would be labor intensive and would give us the kind of dividends that we seek in terms of greater employment? I think this is another area that we need to really focus on. And finally, I think I would just kind of highlight, the importance of digital connectivity, something that I think my colleague, Professor Prabir would, maybe talk about, That's digital connectivity in this era, you see, when again the pandemic has brought forth the inequalities vis-a-vis online education very, very significantly. When schools have been closed, colleges have been closed, and many students around, you see, the region are losing education, not just now, you see, but because of the situation that prevails in the region, may actually drop out of the education completely for the next few years and lose out on that, which brings us back to the skilling of the demography and the demographic profile, the youth profile that exists in this region. How far can we go in terms of being able to connect as far as this, or to bridge this digital connectivity divide that exists, to be able to provide for those who do not have access, given the kind of facilities that we may have in India or that we can develop further, if that can be taken forward to take the idea of education for all to a greater extent across this region, I think that is another aspect that I would consider as very useful, both in terms of trade within the region, as well as in creating a greater skilled demographic profile for employment in terms of the kind of demand that needs to be created and would be created even in the manufacturing sector in the coming times. I'll stop here and come back to any questions, comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Batra, for your excellent, lucid, and very fast, I think, deliberations on the issues. And Madam Batra started with a very theoretical underpinning of the trade issues and how it contribute to the development prospects. As we all know that there is a jargon that trade is an engine of growth, definitely. Before that, she mentioned about the contemporary conditions of the rising food insecurity and undernourishment, and across the countries and different organizations, their surveys have shown like that the impoverishment of the people in terms of the death and the number that widened during this particular pandemic situations, and that has put the people under more challenge. However, she simultaneously mentioned the demographic profile, that majority of the people are now within 15 to 59 years of age in India. And so the country could have enjoyed the demographic dividend, but the challenges faced by them not to reap the demographic advantages because of the education and healthcare disadvantage, climate change, and other issues he has mentioned. And obviously, all these things can be taken care of, as he opined here. Yes. So here in this connection, she then mentioned about the rising trade flow, which was much faster in the pre-2008 and 9, that is the global slowdown of the economies that period. And after that, the growth of the trade has taken place but decelerated after specifically 2012-13 in comparison to the GDP growth. Then she mentioned about that how it is taken over by the trade in services or the intermediate products. And so there was a surge in the global value chain system. So amidst that, the contribution of the South-South trade or the Southeast Asia's trade, which is much more fragmented than in comparison to the other regions, that it is very minimum in this global value chain system that she has mentioned. And we also realize that especially the country like India, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka, where in the Asian zone, that is China is in the leading front. That thing after that, she also mentioned about that multilateralism, the tariff agreement. Amidst this globalization, there are various bilateral agreement, preferential trades among some countries. And still, though in the sub-regional, some cooperations like India's low-cost integration with the Asian countries, but still there is a lack in the value chain system within the region or intra-regional trade that was mentioned here. So these are some of the things highlighted, but still some questions have been raised here. I saw in the question and answer listening, that is India is not joining RCEP. And thereafter, she questioned, are India afraid of doing much trade because of its disadvantageous position in some respect or not? Then another question came that though India and Nepal has a free border, so there was no question of having any blockage on the trade. But sometime because of the land claiming by the India or the Nepal, the border conflicts, that occasionally the border trade specifically has been stopped, and for which the bordering people of both the sides are affected. So how it is that? Then what we see also along with this, during this pandemic period, the composition of the trade had changed, is switched over. Specifically, when other manufacturing products are not being traded or produced, but there are some relaxations. Obviously, you have rightly pointed out that because of some policies also that facilitated some of the companies to grow at the faster rate, like the pharmaceutical producers, and most of the inputs of this pharmaceutical productions in India dependent on the inputs that comes from the ingredients come from China. So though India and China are the leading partners in the South Asian region or Asian region, but always China is much ahead if you compare their export and import compositions. You will see that India's export to China is much lower than the China's export, and they have huge advantage on several aspects. And another thing is that whatever China wants to import, India does not produce much of that. So country can take the advantage even in a regional agreement. What I say, that if the country produce those commodities that is being demanded by those partners, if we produce something else, whereas China wants to import something else, other thing, so definitely we cannot encroach upon their market. That is also true when we consider the India's joining with the Asian countries like that, Asian. And definitely that is the tourism trade, related trade and the tourism. Only last Sunday, it's previous Sunday, that's because last 8-9 months we could not go anywhere. I visited Cherrapunji, just I took my kids, I saw that only wearing some few local people, there is no outsider visiting, whereas more than thousands every day, 1,000 to 2,000 people visit only Cherrapunji in Shillong, in Meghalaya. So you can see how tourism has been devastated, and despite being relaxed that no tourism now can continue, either people are scared or they are not willing to visit. So their willingness to coming is that flow of the people, because either they don't have the capability to spend, demand supply mismatch, as you have mentioned in case of the unemployment, when you talk of the why unemployment despite having demographic dividend conditions, so why we cannot utilize it, and how the informal and other sectors are devastated, and despite how these unemployed people which could be switched over to other companies which are flourishing, why not possible? How to make them, giving them the training for being capable to be engaged in other sectors. As recently in Economic Times, I had mentioned that in this digital age, where the whole country is dependent on the digital mode, that is selling of the either mobile, tab, etc., and the data connectivity. So during that phase, why there was a need to not to revive the BSNL, rather to give more golden handshake or the retirement, forced retirement to the people. So some people are contradicting why BSNL, why not the privatization and like that, because private peoples are not giving that quality employment. Even if Geo is there, neither we are getting the good connectivity and not that it is creating more employment at say. So instead of taking corrective measures to revive the sector, that is when we have some disease, we don't throw out our body. We go for medication and treatment so that we recover. So if there is some faulty system, so we can rectify that, so that system can be revived. And there was huge demand so in the market for the data. So it could be done. So that was one. So in tourism also related to that, by using the digital mode, as one speaker a few days back from Sri Lanka had told that how digital mode or connectivity can be used to promote tourism more there. So which could, as you said, that biobubbles could be created in the, he also spoke like that. And how to make, because tourism has more linkage than any other sector. So whether you call the government or any other manufacturing, if tourism flourishes, it has a long chain of reactions or multipliers. So from transport to manufacturing, everything is involved, because local artisans' product can be sold, and people who visit some tourist sites, they take away. Not only that, the other benefits also. So either the people of the tourist sites, from the hospitality, their hotels and other sectors, everything are linked with this. So only tourism can take care of multiple sectors where no other things are possible. Rather, anyway, this is a very lucid and good exposition, I say, that you have given. Now I open the discussion for the panelists to give their opinion here. So in the beginning, should I go for Ganesh and Wignaraja, sir, Institute of South Asian Studies?
Thank you.
Dr. Ganesh?
Thank you very much, and thanks.
Please give your comment and anything.
Thank you. Sir is joining us from Sri Lanka. Thank you, sir. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair and IMPRI, for the invite, and also to Anita for a very stimulating and thought-provoking lecture, as always. I think you raised a lot of issues about trade and economic development in South Asia, and I was sort of picking through some of the thoughts, and I probably want to make 5 very broad points in the few minutes I've got. The first is really about the theory. I think, you rightly emphasize the theory of comparative advantage, and particularly the rewards to factors of production, and also the fragmentation trade. Probably you want to add to your story a couple of other theories which may be useful. One is firm heterogeneity. So firms are going to be much more important as actors in trade in this new era that we're looking at. And we may also want to look at the Stopser-Samuelson theorems. And let me not go into any of these, but we may want to extend our framework and perhaps come up with some new trade theories also to look at what happens to actors and firms and sectors as we have a unprecedented historical shock, and how they may readjust. So we may want to be thinking of new things in addition to what you said. Second point is this turning point that the chair also mentioned, and also our colleague from the EXIM Bank. So the IMF is talking about this very positive storyline, right? 6% global growth, developing countries at 6+ India in double digit. This is a wonderful upbeat story, right? But the risks, I don't think they've counted enough. There's the risk of exiting this COVID, right? It really depends on, whether the vaccines are available and can deal with this new strain. Protectionism is a big problem, financial stress, and so on. So I think we may be a bit too sanguine about what we are seeing and too complacent. And we've got to be much more vigilant about a second wave of a shock or a very interrupted growth pattern. It could be a W pattern of growth or a bathtub-shaped U to come in 2022 and beyond. So is this sustainable is the big question. The third point she made, I thought was very interesting about these value chains. And really, these value chains, as she pointed out, were really centered on East Asia and on China becoming the manufacturing hub. And as we know, in the last few years, they've started to come out of China and look for other locations. And India is, of course, a big beneficiary of this, along with Vietnam and Indonesia in Asia. And there's also a movement to reshore these value chains back to Europe and the United States, particularly during the Trump era. And we think the Biden era may continue some of that, while also paying some lip service to opening up markets. For the rest of South Asia, there is some risk here about being marginalized in the face of globalization of value chains coming to India and so on. So there are these barriers we need to emphasize. In your talk, I would talk about limited integration, which I think you mentioned, between India and the rest of South Asia, Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, for instance, which are in some segments of the value chain that complement India, the garment sector and the textile sector, for instance. But we could do much more in auto parts, where India is a producer, in pharmaceuticals, where India is a producer, and so on. And I think the extension of these value chains, certainly to Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, for instance, is critical. Now, these countries have to improve their investment climate. They have to deal with trade-related infrastructure gaps, procedures, and so on. That's got to be really important. The third point you mentioned is about regionalism in South Asia. And I think you were saying that there was more there happening than in the multilateral fora. And I think that is broadly true. But I think, the level of what's happening is at a very low point, right? And I think for South Asian regionalism to proceed, we've really got to have the Indo-Pak problem somehow solved. And one hopes that this is something that, the Biden administration will also pay some attention to, given, all the political issues around this point. So South Asian integration will proceed unevenly. Now, different things you talked about, Anita. One was the market-led route through agricultural trade. And I think that is quite useful, but there are, very high tariffs. I mean, this area has very high tariffs and very high non-tariff measures, right? And that's going to be a problem. And then there is this conflict with food security issues, right? And, countries even like Sri Lanka are emphasizing import substitution in food because of the food security issue in part, right? And the lack of foreign exchange. So I think we need to be very cognizant of how this can happen. Maybe Indian investment in the agro-processing industries in the region may be something to think about. But I'm not quite sure what kind of capacity India has in terms of its food and agro multinationals to do this outside. So that is the point. The areas you may not have mentioned are financial services. Now, financial services, I think, are an important area for services trade. And in that sense, I should mention the Colombo Port City project, which is an area of 259 hectares reclaimed from the sea by a Chinese state-owned enterprise. And there is ambition here to create a new Dubai of South Asia in financial, leisure, and other services. And, this could be perhaps a bridge, given the time zone issue, and also given the fact that, India and Pakistan don't do much in financial services. Sri Lanka could be some sort of Mauritius type scenario for India, where portfolio trade could happen in services. And that could be another major opportunity in the coming 5 years, because Colombo Port City will take time to come up. And linked to that is the whole issue of digital trade, where India has, an important advantage in Bangalore. And remember, during the pandemic, digital trade expanded very rapidly across all our countries domestically. So India could be important there. Now, much of India's trade went to the Philippines, right? In terms of the BPO segment in that trade. It hasn't really gone to the neighboring countries. And part of the issue is the lack of tertiary level graduates in, say, Sri Lanka or Bangladesh and others at the right price and the right quality. But maybe some sort of push has to happen around a digital trade treaty of some kind for South Asia, and that might be an agenda item. The other item I want to mention is the whole BIMSTEC agenda, which I don't think you've mentioned much. And BIMSTEC, remember, is a few South Asian countries, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal, and Sri Lanka in South Asia. And then we have Thailand and Myanmar in Southeast Asia. And the reason why BIMSTEC is somewhat interesting is it doesn't have Pakistan, to be blunt about it. And second, you have at least Thailand and India in their respective regions, which are important growth poles. Now, for BIMSTEC to really be a trade process thing, you know, you've got to really have a bold trade proposal at this summit or beyond the summit, really spearheaded by India and Thailand. And one hopes that there are bilateral talks happening to link that up. Otherwise, the progress on the BIMSTEC FTA will be very small. And then if we get a BIMSTEC FTA, hopefully, eventually there can be a pathway towards RCEP coming down. So I think India and Thailand need to think very carefully about what kind of trade proposal may be appropriate there. And something like opening up to everything but arms for the neighbors may be useful with a few sensitive sectors cut out. And we may want to come back to that in the chat. The last point in the 30 seconds I have left is why China. And Amita was talking about, look, it's very obvious. China is the second largest economy in the world. And by definition, it will have endless linkages with the rest of the region, particularly on the import side, right? And we all have trade deficits with China, very large trade deficits. And also China is a capital surplus country, right? So leaving aside the political economy side of all of this and the politics of it, you know, China is just such a massive player in all of this. So that's why China. Now, that's not good enough, of course, because, you know, the trade deficits are unsustainable for the rest of the countries in South Asia. And then on the capital surplus side in the BRI, there's this risk of the debt trap. And Sri Lanka is talked about by some as being involved in that debt trap issue, although it's not quite true yet. There is a risk, but it hasn't happened. We've done a study on this. What you need as a solution is really for the US and India and the EU and so on to up their game the rest of South Asia. So let me stop there and just say, Amita, how much I enjoyed your talk, and you can see it from my comments, and I look forward to the chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Ganesh. Obviously, on agricultural trade, as you mentioned, that there is a high tariff, but there is another point to note here on agriculture is that a huge transaction cost and time lag and wastage, because most of the time what we notice that after the harvest is over, then if there is an overproduction, then government realize that farmers are not getting good price, so they try to negotiate with the other countries where to export it. So it takes a lot of time and much of the product gets spoiled. Instead, after the cultivation season is over, if there is an estimation, what would be the expected output if there is over or under production, what policies can be taken. So most of the cases is not done. And India, Sri Lanka's trade benefit, another thing can come in the way. That is the proposed bridge construction over the from Rameswaram to that. If it made the land route like that bridge over the sea. So I don't know what is the apprehensions of the Sri Lanka. So I think it can be a mutual beneficial for both the countries, isn't it? So now I would like to go to Dr. and Professor Riazul Karim Boksi, who is a professor of economics, also does a lot of work on trade and industries. So he's in Rajshahi University, Bangladesh. So may I request Professor Riazul, please give your valuable comments. And
thank you, Professor Utpal. Am I audible? Can you hear me?
Yes, you go ahead.
Thank you. And I would like to thank you personally, because you gave me the opportunity to join such a scholarly discussion. I was really enjoying Professor Amita's discussion, and also Professor Ganesha's very useful and interesting comments. I hope that I will enjoy the rest of the discussions deliberation also. Okay, Professor Amita has correctly spelled that, okay, theoretically we know that trade is an engine of economic growth, and from Bangladesh perspective, we are exploiting it. Because apart from agriculture, we have the major growth is coming from remittance, that is exporting manpower, and obviously the RMG exports. So there is no doubt that this is happening to every South Asian nation as well. And Professor Amita also correctly said that, okay, there are two common concerns regarding the trade as a development driver. One is the volatility issue, because if the external shock is there, obviously those export and import sector will be, disturbed, and our growth pattern or the path will be affected. That is true for every nation, every country also. And also Professor Amita mentioned correctly about the inequality issue, because some industries will grow faster because of trade and others will lag behind. Okay. So there is no doubt about it, but apart from those concerns, what I will say that, okay, definitely inequality might happen, even if there is no trade, still inequality might happen, because even in a closed economy like Cuba or North Korea, or even say, for example, before 1990s, the trade liberation in India or in Bangladesh. So when we are conservative economies, still inequality is happening. So inequality is not necessarily is a product of trade. It's basically someone will basically move faster and someone will fall behind. This is whether it is we are living in a open economy or whether we are emphasizing on trade or nothing. It will happen. The idea is, when you will have a cake, a smaller cake, everybody will be poor. When you will have a bigger cake, it will be shared by people, and someone will get a bigger chunk and someone will get a smaller chunk. It is ultimately true. And the state definitely has to act in that way. But ultimately, what we will need, we definitely want to have a bigger cake so that we can get a bigger share. So that is imperative. So apart from inequality, we will definitely focus on growth, because if you have growth, you will have the energy or a scope to redistribute it in some way. So political mechanism will correct it today or tomorrow. In my opinion, so the inequality is a very short-term phenomena or medium-term at best, not in the long run. Because in the long run, ultimately the factor price equalization theorem will work. Because if one industry is moving faster, for example, if pharmaceutical industry is getting more profit and textile industry is not, so after 20 years or 10 years, those textile industries who are lacking profit, they will convert their industries to the more profitable one. So in the long run, obviously, those factor price equalization theory will work, and we will definitely see the reduction in inequality. And obviously, another thing is, Professor Amita correctly mentioned, is that we are in South Asia, especially in India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. We have huge population size, and we are, especially the policymakers and politicians, they are often talking about the demographic dividend, that our working age population, the young age population is very high, and we can ride on this horse, But personally, I am not quite sure about it, because one thing already Professor Amita mentioned is skill gap. The industry demanding skill and the supply skill is there is huge gap. For example, in Bangladesh, what we see, there are hundreds of thousands of university graduates are unemployed. We have ready-made garments industries flourishing in the country for the last 30 years, but our mid-level managers are almost all are either from India or from Sri Lanka. What does it mean? It means that the university graduates we are producing are unable to meet the requirement of our domestic industries. That's why we have to look at outsourcing. So in that case, demographic dividend, when you have say millions of unemployed people at home, that means it is not about demographic dividend, because to be demographic dividend, we have to offer full employment level at the very beginning. The policymakers need to work on it, and because we have to say meet up the skill gap, we have to fill up the skill gap, and definitely we have to offer work opportunity. Otherwise, if we don't have any ample work opportunity for everyone, then ultimately those demographic profile will remain unemployed, and we will be unable to exploit the demographic dividend, which is likely to happen in South Asia, especially in Bangladesh, that we are possibly far away from exploiting this benefit. Anyway, looking through the main point of South Asian trade and development. So where is the South Asian integration? Professor Amita correctly said that we are our trade is almost very little, just like 5% in the regional bloc. And definitely one of the key reasons is that the homogeneity of our production is the basic issue. We are almost producing very similar items with very similar technologies. So if there is no heterogeneity, ideally the trade cannot take place that much. So that kind of comparative sources or comparative advantage is lacking currently in South Asia. In ASEAN or say in European Union, That is the one of biggest advantage they have. Their economies are somehow diversified, so their sources of comparative advantage is diversified, and trade is easily taking place. For example, here in South Asia, India has very good medical industry, and also very good some universities and IITs or IIMs, like in education sector. So there are ongoing trade happening actually with this health industry and service industry. It is because of the comparative advantage position, because the India's health industry and this education industries are really well ahead of those industries in other countries. So that's why that trade is taking place in favor of Asia, in India, and also benefiting to the other member countries as they are getting cheaper alternatives, like going to Singapore or Thailand for treatment. Okay, that could be very costly. Okay, here what can actually be done, since we have these issues that, okay, our integration is very small, our comparative advantage is still not that much, or say, well, we are focusing on the very similar industries, similar agriculture and almost similar industries. Apart from, say, for example, the software industries in India, all other industrial outputs are very similar, and so that's why our trade is still small. But still, there are some ways to do, as Professor Amita correctly mentioned, is the global value chain, where in the forward and backward linkage industries we can basically cooperate or we can share. Professor Ganesha also correctly mentioned that, for example, India has the automobile industries. Other countries like Sri Lanka or Nepal or Bangladesh or other countries can collaborate with Indian automobile makers about the backwards or forward issues by linkage industries. But still, there is a challenge, because India is still say fully employed nation. Still, there is unemployment. Means that they have their own domestic labor who are unemployed. They can also come or join to this backward and forwards linkage industry. That is also another challenge still remaining. In the pharmaceutical industries or in the medical industry, still there is same. But yet, I will say that still there are some opportunities, or we can still work on some issues. Ideally, trade in service. We can already, I mentioned that there is a good potential trade in health, to trade in education, and Professor Amita already said that we can also have tourism industries. So this service sector, because the trade in goods or trade in commodities in South Asia is taking very slow speed, or because of comparative advantage issues or others. But trade in health, trade in education, and trade in tourism can take a momentum, can take a very high speed. And also I would like to add is the trade in energy, and especially in producing, say, the water energy or say from using the Himalayas, or using the solar energy or green energy, those kind of energies. Because of one way is India has huge technology, especially coming from the IITs and others. Okay, they can help, and there are also capital necessary for that. And we have the water flows and air flows and the sunlight necessary around the year. So this energy sector can be a collaborative one. So this is my first suggestion, is that, okay, the trade in service can be taken by the policymakers as one route to integrate the South Asian nations if they want to integrate itself. Second is, already I mentioned, is that the backward and forward linkage industries. Here we can collaborate. Here we can basically explore how we can collaborate. The industry professionals, the academicians, the policymakers, they can think about it. And third is, obviously there are some tariff and non-tariff barriers. Those are issues. Sometimes we have to collaborate in that way. How can we reduce the tariff and non-tariff barriers to increase trade among the partnering nations? And four is definitely, I will say that we have to increase the people-to-people connectivity. It can take through increased travel smoothing, road communication between the countries, train communication between the countries, and obviously cultural communication. And why this is important? Because if we are able to connect our people to other countries' people, basically it will eliminate many psychological barriers. For example, if I just want to mention the trade between India and Pakistan and trade between India and Bangladesh, for example, is very often disturbed by political sentiments. Like, for example, when there is issue of exporting beef, it becomes politics. India is exporting beef to everywhere in Europe and others, but when it comes to Bangladesh or Pakistan, it becomes sentimental. So if people, what I'm saying is that if people to people are connected with travel, with cultural collaboration, with others, those barriers will automatically be eliminated. The similar issues is in Bangladesh, sometimes they want to export Hilsha to West Bengal, because West Bengal is a great fond of Hilsha fish from Bangladesh. Again, the sentimental comes, because if Bangladesh exports Hilsha to any other country, it will not be a problem. But if it export Hilsha to India, then some people say, oh, why you are exporting Hilsha? Because we are not getting enough Hilsha in our domestic country and you are exporting it. But that means that there are some kind of psychological barriers which only can be eliminated if people to people communication or connection can be established through increased connectivity. My next suggestion is we have to say control the political tension. And because if there is political tension, if there is a communal politics, or if there is border politics, something like that, it will definitely negatively affect our tourism that we want to focus. It will definitely affect our trade. It will definitely affect our connectivity. So if political tension is there, if say some narrowism or populism is there, so then definitely it will affect our all those issues, our collaboration in tourism, collaboration in trade, collaboration in connectivity. Because someone will say, don't make this bridge, it will connect this nation to this nation. Don't make this railway connecting this land to that land, something like that. So those political tension can only be eliminated by the policy makers, because the policy makers are in the driving seat. Academicians and others, we can just prepare the groundwork, prepare the arguments, but it is ultimately those policy makers who have to lead. Like, I know if you are in driving seat, whether it's Trump or Biden, that matters most. So ultimately they have to take the lead. And last but not least, what I will say that the comparative advantage concept is itself a dynamic concept. It's not a static. Today we see that there is no such comparative advantage. But after 10 years, there might be the issues. For example, when at the world stage, the economy is moving, the world is moving. So for example, after 20 years, who knows that India will maybe solely concentrating on software industries, because they might earn billions of dollars from software. So they might definitely then drop some agriculture, some automobile industries, some textile industries that other nations can grab. But today we don't see any, say, comparative advantage notions that much, but tomorrow, who knows what will happen? Because with the dynamic world context, every day it is changing and new opportunities are coming to the world, and it's time for us to grab it. So from me, I think I will stop here and I will talk later after hearing valuable comments from the others. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Professor Rijaul, for your elaborate comment. And definitely, I agree with your last two comments of the psychological and political barriers like that, and the issues that sometimes affect the trade promotion, especially the tourism and other things. But the other two things that you told, I little beg to differ here, like that factor price equalization system will take care of this inequality in that thing. Because this vector price equalization, that theorem only works under certain conditions, that when the markets operate under fully perfectly competitive conditions. So here it does not happen. Institutional and infrastructural blockages are there, and countries are not highly developed. Here you can see our systems are not that foolproof that promptly you give an application, immediately reply comes. You have to wait 10 days, give bribe, all these things are there. So those come on the way here. So equalization will be difficult. And another thing, that whatever graduates you are producing in Bangladesh, so they are not capable. So you are not getting advantage of the demographic dividend, because they are not that efficient to be employed in the government or other sectors. So you have to import the technical labor from India or other countries. Actually, what I notice, if you go by your data, that those who are good quality graduate students from Bangladesh, they are either because of their relative advantage or earning capability, you can say the opportunity, going to the West Asia or Europe. So that's only true. Those who are left over cannot go out, they are only sitting there. So that's why they are unemployed. Those who are capable, they are going out at the same capability, can earn much more in terms of the dinar from Iraq and other places, or
That is also true.
Saudi
That is also
Arabia,
true.
or that. So that is the thing. So that is also a part of the globalization and integration process. Even some of the Bangladesh's good people who has that capacity can be employed in India, or specifically more salary they are getting, so going to Sweden and other places. That is good thing.
Exactly.
So anyway, so as much of the time already gone, so I am going switching over quick to our neighboring countries, then I will come back to our India. So Dr. Raghu Bista, please give your comment. He is a faculty of economics in Tribhuvan University, Nepal. So I think he also had delivered a lecture on the regional trade and its prospect under pandemic situation. So can contribute here. Professor Bista? Professor Raghu, can you hear me?
Professor Bista, please unmute yourself.
Otherwise, we can go to India.
Professor Bista, please unmute yourself. You are on mute. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for this opportunity, and thank you for provoking presentation for Professor Batra. Sorry, I haven't, covered all the lecture presentation, but I have, listened the, last portion of the presentation. I found she mentioned the theoretically and potentiality of the 4 and 5 sectors, including agriculture, tourism, value chain, and services, and the, pharmaceutical industry products also. And yes, theoretically it is okay, but when we come in the fact and the empirical side, if we observe the South Asian trade, we can find out the under trade situation. If we observe the World Bank's, reports and India, reports, we get the, only we have, its, value is the $23 billion, trade, but we have a, potential of the $67 billion. And that is the situation when you compare, when you convert into the percentage, it is approximately 5%. But when we observe the East Asian and sub-Saharan countries, we can find out the 50% and 22%. And what are the causes behind it, and what are the drivers? If you look about the trade restrictive index, we can easily find out when we talk about the trade restrictive at the South Asian level, India has 4.59, but when we observe the rest of the world, its size is 0.50. And similarly, Sri Lanka, Nepal, and Pakistan, all countries rest of the world have a lower restrictive index, but in the case of the South Asia, they are its value is more than rest of the world. And in this situation, individual or the member countries of the South Asian countries have not good body language for the trade liberalization by removing it, trade restrictiveness, but they have liberalized all these things to the rest of the world. And in this situation, and we can easily find out some issues. One is when we observe the South Asian trade regime and also the trade relationship, we can find out the non-transparent and protective tariff. We can find out in the case of the Pakistan, in the case of the Bangladesh, Nepal has also, all countries try to have imposed and executed such types of the tariff, and to stop the flow of the goods and services, and to promote the intra and inter-trade activities. And another factor we can issue can be found non-tariff barrier. If we observe the India and Nepal has the some sort of the provisions and mechanisms. But when we observe the trade flow of the goods and services between two countries, we can easily find out the non-tariff barriers. It also has the such types of the our trade promotion. And third is the higher cost of the trade. And this is the if we enter region and intra-region, we can easily find out the trade has a higher cost, and because of the lower poor connectivity in terms of the infrastructure and also the digital also. And another part is the we have another issue is the procedural and infrastructure issue. And these issues have created or the limited our trade volume and value within the region. And in this situation, when we observe the it's convert the GDP ratio, we can easily find out, yes, we have a huge potential in the different sector, but we have only contribute 1% GDP at the regional level. But when we observe the sub-Saharan countries, it contributes more. And in this situation, something we have a problem. And in this situation, major problem and the major issue is the trust deficit between and among the our neighbor countries. And without the improving the that trust deficit issue, we cannot reduce the psychological barrier, political barrier, and the trade barriers and other different types of barriers. In this way, it shows or the indicates we are not interested to promote or to capture, mobilize, utilize our potentially at the intern and the intra-regional trade. And in this situation, when we observe and when we observe the product and our market, product market and labor market and and financial and capital market, we can easily find out the certain types of the homogeneity. And yes, we are all are the member of the WTO and member of the other different types, the sub-regionalism and regionalism. We talk more about the comparative advantage, but when we come in the our country at the national level, we forget about it. At the regional level, we forget about it. And in this situation, well, we have not initiated serious effort, to improve or trade liberalism and come, to get the benefit from the comparative advantage, to reduce the cost of production and also the other different types of things. So we are able to promote our regional and intra-regional trade. But when we observe the China, we can easily find out the China try to capture the South Asian market, but the India is our potential or the hopeful country. But when we observe the scenario, we cannot find the which types of the trade strategy is adopted by the China to promote the market and to grab the market of the South Asian countries. But in the case of the India just focusing much more on the national issue and the national agenda or national interest. And in this situation, what will happen? Till 2030, we expect or we project China will be the first economy of the world, but the India has a similar potentiality. And when we observe the South Asian countries, we have a much more hope to get the benefit from the Indian market and the Indian investment, Indian capital, technology, and other different types. Nowadays, we can easily find out we are very thankful to get the vaccine. And similarly, such types the potential are limited by our nationalism and fundamentalistic issue or communal issues, and it creates the more barrier between the countries and intra countries on the such types of the real needed issue at the regional level. But when we talk, I would like to share about the Nepal. Just like the Nepal has the different types of political issues also, border issues also, and these border issues have said it or they have created the problem or they made critical situation to the trade issues or the trade relationship. And in the absence of the trust surplus or the lack of the trust deficit. And in this situation, we all together, we must think about how to improve how to reduce the trust deficit, to reduce the psychological, political, economical, and other different types of barriers. And then after we are able to promote, people to people's, relationship, and it will help or it will contribute to promote our or intra-regional trade relationships. But the actual situation sometimes, even in some cases, we have a certain types of benefits on the which sectors are mentioned or identified by the paper, in the cooperation or the other different tasks, the activities, but still it is not sufficient to it. And we have to do much more. And we don't need much more, theoretical one. We need, empirical one to, provide the valuable input to our, regional policymaker or the, our governments. And then we are able to solve the basic or the simple issues, not more than the big things. But just like if we are not talking about the comparative advantage, we just improve the trade barriers, including non-tariff and tariff barriers and other different tasks, the infrastructure issue and connectivity issues. We are able to capture our potential trade within the SARC region, and based on our homogeneous products also. But if we are able to go in the second level by using the comparative advantage, we get the more benefit, and then India can compete China if we India leads, or collectively India collectively leads to the other South Asian member countries. Otherwise, what will happen? Yes, India and China has a competition, but ultimately
Dr.
China.
Raghu, please summarize.
Yes.
Dr. Raghu, please summarize.
Yes. In this situation, we also raised these issues and try to solve the basic issues of our intra-regional trade and for our economic development and prosperity at the region. Thank you.
So now, actually, Professor Prabir, they have to go for some other work. So that's why, sorry to interrupt you. So I invite Professor Prabir De, who is now in RIS, New Delhi. So who delivered a good lecture on this regional cooperation and trade issues also a few days back. So I invite him to give his valuable comments. Prabir Da, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair and the speaker, Professor Amita Batra, and other commentators. So thank you very much, organizer, for the invitation. I will be very brief because we actually exceeded the time. I switch off my video because I don't have enough battery in my mobile, unfortunately. I had another webinar just before that, and I have to leave in 5 minutes. Sorry about it. I'll very brief. I think in continuation with Professor Batra's, I would be coming into some kind of a discussion, which is more into the policy. Now, first is the trade part. What Professor Batra said presentation, that there is an opportunity which are mostly unmet. So, and I would like to take it from there. Like, if you count how many new measures each 8 individual member countries introduced during February 20 to December. So I had a paper already on this, that almost about an average 150 new measures these countries, they have introduced for what? To facilitate trade. Why suddenly facilitate trade in COVID time? What countries used to do before that? We know the story. COVID time, objective was to sort of a contactless trade, paperless trade, kind of an environment, Now, reducing the cost of trade, reducing the time to trade, all this is a known story. No need for any, okay, these could be good for PhD thesis, but so far the policy making is concerned, we know all about it. The new development, which is the paperless trade, contactless trade. And so what could be done by the 8 countries if they agree to join a hand, as they have done it during the February to December, some of the measures which are unimaginable before February 2020, they introduced many of those. Please refer to my paper if required. I can share, which came out from the UNSCAP in month of August to September. So one is the regional paperless trade agreement, and there is an agreement already come in effect by the UN, just called paperless trade agreement. So Bangladesh has signed it, given a precedence for other South Asian countries to follow. So this is point number 1 to be noted. Maybe if Professor Batra would like to, convert it today's talk into a paper, this can be, added in there. Second is supply chain, which she spoke about. Now, supply chain resilience, That's what we are discussing. Disruption of supply chain. Can we go for supply chain? Not decoupling, looking at a particular country, rather resilience aspect of supply chain. So this part, somehow we need to bring in the discussion. How do we bring resiliency in the supply chain when you talk about textile and clothing or a garment, processed food, particularly when we're looking for point-to-point transportation, logistic services, etc. in a South Asia, particularly Eastern South Asia. So here comes the digital linkages. Please, refer to some of the initiatives taken by European countries. We call it electronic filing of TIR. So can we do a regional filing of electronic certificate of origin, regional filing of any kind of documentation, so that the time is less, contact less trade is prevailed. So point number 2. Point number 3, part of the connectivity, that we in South Asia, no connectivity is presently happening because of the misunderstanding with the member countries. Each member countries, they have their own agenda. When individually we move, a regional cohesiveness cannot happen. We have South Asian neighbors, we don't have South Asian neighborhood. That's the Professor S.D. Mooney of JNU and some of them have been talking about. We need to re-establish the neighborhood. This is somehow we need to bring it there. Second is to set up support is in the connectivity. There are sub-regional programs. Professor Batra know it very well. Ganesha and Wignaraja and others, they have been contributing many serious type of works. But energy is an area where I see in a Q&A, some of the energy projects which could be low-hanging fruits to start with in South Asia. Even if we have a disagreement on the motor vehicle agreement, cross-border transportation, energy is something where we can collaborate. And during the pandemic, before pandemic, despite differences politically and security, we could not stop sharing energy. This is one. So, and of course, the other form of connectivity is a very important, physically, digitally, etc., etc. During the pandemic time, Port of Colombo have removed all sorts of duties and charges and wharfages on the goods which are not lifted from the Port of Colombo terminals. So that kind of innovative measures Sri Lankan government took. But again, when the pandemic disappeared, those even the useful policies, those were also taken away. Point number 5 is now if we can do a kind of an post-pandemic agenda for us. One is for the discussion to support and agreeing fully with concur with the presenter Professor Batra that on the health sector, we had a March 15th, 2020, Prime Ministers, India and other leaders, they shook hand, and then they went for SASC COVID fund, etc., etc. Perhaps sharing the vaccines, perhaps this is where we can call a meeting again and find out how each and everyone can coordinate each other, what sort of vaccination is required and the way forward. Can you do a joint R&D? Can you do a South SASC research and development program for epidemiology and something area? Look at the South Asian ASEAN initiatives. I had a paper on the context of BIMSTEC. If needed, I can share some of you. And then so post-pandemic agenda, one is that health sector. I said that let there be a call for another heads of missions, heads of states again, if needed, to follow up on the vaccinations, etc., etc. Joint projects, particularly R&D projects. I mean, so that in future, if this happens, then we can share the resource pool. Point number 2, when we have introduced a very futuristic programs, initiatives, as we have done, can we continue to restoring the trade and sectoral program like trade facilitation, the ideas, so South Asia trade facilitation initiatives. So this is possible because individual countries average 150 measures already introduced, and some of those are now rolling back by the member countries. Point number 3, maybe we need to have, as I said, the supply chain resilience, and here, in case we can't do in regional format, bilaterally, like with between Afghanistan, Pakistan, they share the borders, like Nepal, Bhutan in India, Nepal, Bhutan with Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka, India. So sub-regionally, we can do many such resilience initiatives. One example how Bangladesh and India, they have done, or Nepal and India, they have done during the COVID time, is that that is filing any kind of imports bill, which is online, which is impossible if there were no COVID. Always the customs official demand that those to be submitted print copy. So the countries have removed away all those. So to conclude that I compliment, congratulate Professor Batra for a fantastic presentation, other panelists, speaker, Deputy Managing Director from EXIM Bank, and all the colleagues for an excellent discussions. I have to be very brief, and that's why I have come out kind of an way forward. So thank you very much. With that, I conclude and I revert to the chair, Professor Utpal, for your comments. I have to leave because I have another meeting. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Professor Day. So now I think Madam Batra may like to respond to some of the queries that raised by the esteemed panelists here, and then we will go to other.
No, or if Mr. N. Ramesh like to add anything to Professor Batra before we go? Yes, sir.
Okay.
A few of the things I would like to address. In my previous avatar in Department of Commerce, I have dealt agriculture exports and closely worked with South Asian countries, primarily on facilitating the trade. I think with that experience in mind, I can definitely appreciate the theme of the today's discussion, the trade in facilitating the growth in all these countries. Trade leads to efficient allocation of resources and leads to prosperity, and that we have seen in all the big trading countries, say, be it China or Japan or South Korea. So this can be a replicable model in South Asian countries also. India has been a beneficiary of this to a larger extent, and there is a continuous focus on this front. Now, the global value chain, which was repeatedly mentioned by Professor Batra, is the key to this particular development in trade, because the trade is no more a silo that one product getting made from scratch to the finished product in a single country. I think this is a very well established model. Now, if South Asian countries need to prosper, they need to be integrated very well with this global value chain. At least there can be a start between the South-South trade itself. There is a good opportunity to coordinate with amongst ourselves. Now, coming to the issues as such, most of the current exports is in the agriculture exports, where countries have more or less a similar systems, similar requirements, and the shortage or excess production is almost simultaneous, in the sense the opportunities or threats are happening at the same time. But nevertheless, there is a definite established trade between all our South Asian countries in the agriculture sector. Basically, a lot of work has been done on improving the trade in between the South Asian countries, starting with the issues mentioned by Professor Prabir, taking up several new measures, setting right the transport mechanism or the trade facilitation. So the paperless trade, the customs coordination between Bhutan, Bangladesh, and India, are establishing capacity building opportunities between India and Nepal. In fact, there is an agreement between FSSAI and the Nepalese counterpart. There is an agreement between FSSAI and Bhutan. So there is a lot of efforts to bring on the standards which are needed for development of trade. Now, I think there were a few comments on uh, trade tensions and all. I think we must all remember trade cannot happen at the expense of national interest. All said and done, trade uh, is dependent on the interest of the country, and that is where one of the country in the SAFTA network is completely kept out, and the whole idea that SAFTA is not moving is giving rise to formation of a different bloc in its informal form also. So I think this changing equations are being better reflected between the uh, cooperation between uh, partners which are more aligned with their interests. I would like to give few examples. Say there is a better coordination between textiles between Bangladesh and India, where the raw material supply is largely going from India to Bangladesh, and the finished products are coming to India. Same is with Sri Lanka, wherein a good amount of food processing, particularly in the juices and honey, happens in Nepal, and then the finished products are exported to India. Similarly, in Sri Lanka, many of the Indian entrepreneurs have set up the spices or tea-related industries, and they're importing bulk of it into India. So this kind of initiatives have started happening and picking up pace and started into moving to non-agriculture products as well. I hope with all these initiatives, better understanding, there will be more trade in non-agriculture products, which is going to be the main driver of growth. There was a question I would like to answer on the energy uh, diplomacy or cooperation in trade in energy part of it. In fact, as part of our responsibility, EXIM Bank is very active in this space. One of our highest lending to any other country was to Bangladesh. This is to develop a power project, thermal power project in Bangladesh. We have lent around $1.6 billion. And this is going to be the single largest program wherein India has facilitated an infrastructure development in another country, and it is going to significantly contribute to the needs of energy in Bangladesh. In fact, under the lines of credit, which Exim Bank of India operates, the top 3 recipient countries are our neighborhood countries. We have around $10.8 billion of lines of credit with these countries, mainly Bangladesh, Nepal, and Sri Lanka. Apart from this, we have another program wherein we also give buyer's credit. We have a project in Sri Lanka as well as Maldives, where we are, facilitating water supply and road development and infrastructure housing development projects. So there is coordination, cooperation on several fronts, be it from Exim Bank side specifically or on a policy level. I think all these are taking a better shape. There is definitely a scope for further improvement in trade. There is a larger realization that if we act as one trade bloc, there is a possibility of developing more business opportunity within this South Asian trade bloc. The governments involved are well aware of this particular realism. And as Mr. Prabir they said, this has not stopped even during the COVID period, and it is going to gain more momentum. The sharing of knowledge is another important aspect, particularly the services industry comes into play there. There is a huge inflow of patients who come into India from Bangladesh and other neighboring countries. There is also an effort to build in a good infrastructure in this front as well as the education services are gaining momentum on this front. So all in all, I think we can look forward to a better trade relation between the South Asian countries. Of course, we can discount one country at this point of time. These are my comments, and the level of discourse by other speakers were very enlightening. I hope we can develop more better policy from this discussion. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Ramesh. I think it is about 5 o'clock, so it will be too late. Rather, before giving Madam to respond, so 1 or 2 questions if come, you please take together and do. So, Dr. Simi, would you like to?
No, Professor Utpal. Amita ma'am, please go on. Too much already.
I think, yeah, I
already
think.
Okay, Madam. Please
given that we have only a couple of minutes, let me. I will, of course, thank everybody for the very, vast array of areas that have been covered by their comments. Of course, one has to understand that as far as this region is concerned or any region is concerned, one has to distinguish between what is theoretical, academic perspective, what is the empirical, analytical perspective, and then what is the policy perspective, I think a lot of realism has to set in when we are talking about policy implementation. On the ground realities, have to be accepted when trade happens, in the context, I think 2 things that I would like to point out here, picking up from the comments that have been made and in the context of what I said. Of course, it's never the idea that in 20, 25 minutes or 30 minutes or in a 2-hour seminar, we can cover all that is, under the rubric of trade and South Asia. But I think very encouraging to note that there have been new measures, that, a disaster like ore and once in a lifetime, what we are experiencing today, the challenge of the pandemic, can augur well for trade in the region in terms of creating new avenues as well as new opportunities, as well as new methods, rules, trade facilitation, regulatory issues being taken into consideration, I think is all very, very good, very often, though, what is seen as brought in during these difficult times or challenging times do not really become permanent, So I think what we have to do at this point of time is to be able to, grant them an element of or attribute to them an element of permanence so that many of these rules, regulations, ease of trade that is being talked of today during the pandemic, can actually be extended to other commodities later beyond the pandemic also in the region. I think that's something that's very, very significant. And 2, I think the intra-regional, despite what has been said, in terms of political challenges, political issues, national interest, one country, etc., I think it's very important to understand that for all of South Asia, individually, we've looked at the West in terms of our major markets, and we have to understand that in the pandemic, I think the West is the worst performing. It's still caught up in terms of both the pandemic as far as the disease is concerned, lack of recovery, as well as the economics of it, and as well as the internal challenges. If we look at some of the major economies at this point of time, UK having come out of Brexit, United States having to deal with internal challenges in terms of the pandemic and economy, major challenges. Therefore, it's very, very important, that we start to look at the intra-regional measures, possibly, if that can be so, that the political and economic, if that can to a certain extent be, kind of disengaged with each other and take forward the economics for the betterment of everybody, I think the region will benefit as a whole. We have to understand that a certain amount of economics and peace, go together. Interdependencies create means for long-run, peaceful, bilateral and regional relations. There, of course, is also the issue that prior peace is necessary. There has to be a certain threshold level of good bilateral relations to take forward regional trade or bilateral trade and create those interdependencies. But I think we must strive for that. And that is where I will end on a positive note, hoping that we can, strive for a better South Asia as a regional bloc in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam. So I would request Mr. Arjun, Dr. Arjun, to give a vote of thanks with his comment.
I think Simi had some questions. Simi can ask.
Okay. Then go ahead.
Yes,
please go ahead.
Because I wanted ma'am really to come so long. Yes.
Well, thank you so much. And ma'am, I will not take much time. I just wanted to thank you To inform everyone, ma'am has been my teacher during my MA days, and I have learned a lot from her ever since. So thank you so much, ma'am. I just have a few quick comments. It was being said that after RCEP decision, India is more focused on some sort of an FTA with the UK and USA, where there will be a greater value as with as against RCEP. But it is easier said than done. We know that the conversation around the bilateral investment treaty with the US has been there for quite some time, and even the mini trade deal that was really hyped during Donald Trump's visit, it has all evaporated into thin air. So with the new administration yet to clearly demonstrate the comfort in dealing with India, would a restoration of the GSP status demand, which has been demanded by India, exemption from high duties on steel and aluminum products, be acceptable to the US, especially that there is a domestic backlash in the US itself from the American businesses against the Biden government. And finally, I totally subscribe and second your recommendation to vigorously bring agriculture into the trade domain, because my own MPhil and PhD work has been on US-India agricultural trade, and a lot of potential actually exists, and it has not really been explored. In fact, US and Indian businesses like USIBC, CII, ASOCHAM, and now USISPF, they are all batting for it. And especially with regards to agro-processing, agri-businesses that you've spoken about. And more importantly, I would say the agricultural research and development part could really yield to benefits in the region, or maybe also reinvigorate SAFTA for that matter. So why not take it as a case for SAFTA on bringing agriculture into that domain? So that's it from my side, ma'am. Thank you so much for your really engaging lecture. I really learned a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. I also wanted to just add few things on the front of economy, because we are in pandemic. Ma'am, as you rightly also mentioned, that world in the first decade of this century, we also witnessed high growth, but also followed by the subprime lending crisis. And after that, what in the last decade, what happened, many people also term it as globalization, that the globalization is slowing. And now in pandemic, what we are also witnessing, something, countries also becoming sort of protectionist and others. Many experts are saying it deglobalization. So these phenomena are also occurring. And while, ma'am, you also mentioned about the value chains. The value chains really, as we have understand and gathered, that these value chains are also behaving in a race to bottom manner. So there the efficiency part really matters. And what China has been able to do, and now what it is doing with the global finance, and also focusing on services, they have RCEP, BRI, One Belt, One Road, so many things also coming. And also in digital also they have the edge. And now, as India, we are also looking at something of national infrastructure pipeline. Our infrastructure push is also there, and we are also integrating our South Asian regions. And a lot of our push is also backed up by Japan. So, ma'am, how do you see the role of Japan and China? What is happening also to the South Asian countries? And during this, I really wanted to ask that what is happening in our South Asian part, that a lot of ease of doing business or ease of trade is also handicapped by the governance or corruption or the local scenario. Even in Pakistan, when China is doing things also, there also corruption and other things are coming. So how do you see the governance conundrum in South Asia for not this big push, and what can be done ahead? We also have AIIB as a financial institution. So how are we moving as a trade bloc in South Asia and leverage it? And how do you see Quad and other things coming up since Biden administration have also come? What is your take on that? Really? And ma'am, on the data front, I really thought that since Mr. N. Ramesh sir is here, he will be able to also add something more on the different databases you were mentioning. So yes, ma'am, over to you. There are many
Okay.
questions which have come, ma'am. You can choose to answer so many.
Okay, you want me to answer? Okay, then this is a lot of
Whatever you
questions.
want.
So, one, of course, about the RCEP, the Quad, the Indo-Pacific, India's trade deal with the United States, UK. I think I have been writing throughout last year my business standard columns. I would refer everybody to that, because I've written extensively on how it would be advantageous, or it would have been advantageous for India to join the RCEP as far as entry into global value chains is concerned. We could not have found a better instrument, a better vehicle to become a part of regional and global value chains. And this is even more important, post-pandemic, because if we look at recovery, then East Asia has had, is among the first ones to have recovered both from the pandemic strongly enough as far as the economy is concerned, and particularly in the office machinery, office equipment, electronic machinery sectors, sectors where India has been striving, in the sense chemicals is one sector which is our lead trade sector, actually the recovery has been much more slower, Also in agriculture, you see, which a lot of us have been talking about in terms of promoting agricultural trade for India, that I feel personally, internationally, if you're going to be talking about our trade with the rest of the world, post-pandemic is going to come across a lot of higher standards and specifications, whether it be SPS, in the sense of sanitary and phytosanitary standards. I think post-pandemic, given the kind of health and hygiene importance, food and food products would become would become subject to these kinds of standard specifications, we are up against times, I think, when the non-tariff barriers in this context would be on the rise, So we have to be very careful about how we think about promoting our own trade and value chain integration. West, as I said, slower recovery, slower growth in any case for the past few years, now worsened as far as the pandemic is concerned. With the US no mini trade deal did come about despite all the talk as far as President Trump was concerned. With President Biden, I think in the morning I was reading the newspapers where it said, buy in America. Sorry. Buy in America is the new mantra that Biden is giving, So how much are they going to be really getting into trade is going to be a completely different aspect, I'm not too sure whether they would be really interested in immediately going forward with trade deals at all, They have not clarified their trade stance very, very clearly, not with Asia, not with South Asia, with India in any way as such so far, If the United States thinks about joining the CPTPP, that is out of which, Biden had, President Trump had walked out, then I think some kind of a scenario change would happen as far as Asia is concerned, East Asia is concerned. And that, I think, would be an interesting aspect to kind of watch for as far as regional trade formulations are concerned. That's something that I would be looking forward to see if that's going to happen, In terms of Japan and China, what is it that they're doing? Well, China, as we've seen in South Asia, increasingly becoming a partner, trade partner, investment partner. We've seen comments coming from Sri Lanka talking about the Colombo Port City project, you see, which they see as a major financial center, and nobody has any qualms about taking more from China in terms of given the deep pockets that it has, despite the debt trap argument that is put forward in almost all cases, So you see the kind of balancing that's happening as far as the other South Asian economies are concerned between these two. There is a need, I think, for India to be able to negotiate its space in this kind of rising Chinese presence as far as investment and trade within the region are concerned, even though it is laden with many problems, of its own. I think those are very, very important aspects. I think I've kind of lost track of what Arjun had asked, if there is one quick question from you, Arjun, I can quickly, give you an answer to that. Are these answered? Or,
Ma'am, already answered. I was really asking that because so many energy, housing, now vaccine diplomacy also, how do you see the leadership taking it, given the political economy of the world now. Yes.
Yeah, no, I mean, as far as within, I think political economy of the world is difficult to say, because there is a combination of both. It's very contradictory, I would say, On the one hand, we've seen economic nationalism. We've also seen during the pandemic, in the initial times, trade nationalism to a very large extent, where everybody wanted to keep PPE, masks, etc., to themselves initially, and then everyone wanted to share, So, there has been that kind of increased trade in medical equipment that the pandemic engendered, that was greater cooperation. But one also has to understand that at the broader level, multilateralism has suffered, both before and during the pandemic, particularly so given the United States stance under the Trump administration, Whether we see a return to multilateralism will again have a lot to do with how United States reclaims its position within the multilateral system, and also within the WTO in terms of appointments as far as the dispute settlement mechanism are concerned, which is what was completely, one would say obstructionist attitude that we saw from President Trump earlier, Do we see United States getting back to its leadership role in global multilateral institutions, particularly as far as trade is concerned? Because if multilateralism doesn't move forward, under the US leadership, then I think regionalism is going to be catching momentum even more. And that is where the RCEP becomes important. That is where the CPTPP, if the US will join, becomes important. Also within the region, I think the China, Japan, Korea, FTA probably getting a fillip through the RCEP, because it's the first time that these countries have come together in any formal FTA, So that, I think, acquires a different shape and formulation altogether, With India, Japan, I think, although we did have to counter that BRI, etc., the Asia Africa Growth Corridor, that we started with the AAGC, But I don't think that has really gathered momentum in terms of implementation. So we need to see a more active role that India takes in both South Asia as well as the larger region for it to really be able to, I would say, negotiate its rightful position in the region. I think I'll stop here.
Thank you, ma'am. Quickly to wrap up the session, Mr. N. Ramesh, would you like to have some concluding thoughts towards the deliberation?
I think I will not take any more time. It is a well-participated discussion, and I thank Professor Amita Batra and the organizers and all the participants in having a fruitful discussion here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Professor Utpal, if you can propose a vote of thanks formally to.
Okay, thanks a lot, Professor Batra, for your valuable time to spare for providing us with your valuable information and illuminating lecture, logical understanding of the whole matter of this regional trade and development challenges that is being faced by the countries in South Asia. I think not only me, others are also benefited here from the informations that have been disseminated through your lecture. Also, I would like to thank the other panelists, Professor Prabir, Riazul Karim Bakshi from Bangladesh, and Dr. Ganesha from Sri Lanka, Dr. Raghu from Nepal, and obviously the organizer come panelist, Dr. Simi Mehta and Dr. Arjun. So I would like to conclude here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And also thank you to Professor Amita Batra and Mr. N. Ramesh sir for joining, taking out their time. Thank you so much. Have a nice evening. Thank you.
Pleasure for me. Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank
Professor.
Have a nice evening. Yes.